Hello, Eva. How are you today?
Hey, Heather, I'm doing great.
Good. Excellent. Thank you so much for being here on the She Lazy podcast. I am so thrilled and excited to get to speak to you today. And I would love if you could kick off our show by sharing with our audience a bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yes. So I am Eva, as you said. And so what I do is I help bold women leaders to defy the status quo, amplify their influence, and expand their wealth and power through magnetic thought leadership. And
Love
so to
that.
thank you, same here. And to break that down, more concretely, I work with my clients who tend to be coaches, consultants, even leaders in corporate with, okay, they have so much expertise and insight in between their ears, but often lack the time in their schedule or the skill set to turn that insight and knowledge into really compelling articles or a video series that makes sense or podcast episodes that have flow. So I work with them on, it's partially we do some mindset work, but we do a lot of just like nuts and bolts. Okay, tell me your ideas. I'm going to take notes. We're going to turn this into something that's really compelling for your audience to read.
That sounds so fascinating. And you've helped some like pretty notable names create that process for them and just really kind of help them fine tune their genius, if you will, in that space.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about what do I love about my work, I mean, there are lots of things, but certainly on the top three is the relationships I get to have with my clients, because when you're working on their thought leadership and what they really believe and what their perspective is, that can be a very intimate relationship, and you get to know these fascinating people with such just remarkable experiences in a really deep way, and I love that.
Yeah. Take us back a little bit, and how did you get to be Eva now? Like, what journey led you to be able to realize and recognize that that was your gifting, and then be able to create the space for yourself to create a very successful business in that space?
I love how you asked that, Heather. And it reminds me, when I think back of like, you know, looking back, you can kind of draw a straight line, but in the present, your path typically feels like it's zigging and zagging in all sorts of ways.
So the roller coaster, yeah.
Yes. So that is certainly what it has felt like from behind my two eyeballs. But when I look back, I can remember when I was in university, a friend of mine once like said to me, she was annoyed. She was like, "Ugh, it's so annoying, like how quickly you can write your essays. Like you just sit at your desk and you just write it and then you're done." And I haven't thought about that memory in a while, but your question prompted it, because in terms of the skill set or the kind of bringing I actually call it my zone of joy, not my zone of genius, but bringing that to the fore is writing is like a love language for me, and it just comes so easily to me, and so just effortlessly and joyfully. And so it delights me now to be able to provide that service and work with people on writing in particular. But in terms of how I got here, my gosh, I mean, it started the way a lot of other women business owners and entrepreneurs I know have started, which is from a place of like a little t traumatic experience. So I was working in corporate in my mid-20s. I had a job with a company that I completely adored. And for a variety of reasons, the job just utterly imploded. And I was like, okay, I need to get out of here. And I didn't have a plan. It happened really unexpectedly, that this job falling apart, and I had no like idea of what to do next. And I think what I would say now, I'm sure I wouldn't have said this at the time, but what I would say now is that I was pretty intimidated and daunted by the idea of going through the application and interview process. And so I was like, well, like I don't have any responsibilities in terms of like a mortgage or children or even a pet or even a car payment. So let me just try to start a business. So that was, I mean, thank God I didn't know what I didn't know, frankly, because I wouldn't have done it otherwise. So I started actually a professional organizing business at first, because that is a thing that I enjoy doing, but that didn't really feel like the right fit. And I was like a millennial with communications and marketing experience. So I ended up providing that service very unexpectedly. And my business grew through word of mouth and it grew. And I was helping my clients, who are primarily women entrepreneurs themselves, like communicate more effectively and say things in a more bold, uncompromising fashion, and really leverage curated content for their audience and a lot of different aspects of marketing. And so I did that for a while, but that never quite felt like, the thing I wanted to hang my hat on. Really, when I think about women's voices and amplifying our influence and really creating our thought leadership, like that's what gets me so excited. And it ties back to university in another way, in that I got my undergraduate degree in gender and women's studies. And the question I always got was, well, what kind of a job are you going to get, Eva? And so it makes me I'm proud that I was and have created a life's work that's very closely tied to that field of study, which I would never have foreseen back in the day.
Yeah, I love that. So you paired that with your original idea of professional organizing, because still in some sense that is like kind of what you do. You just don't do it with stuff. You do it with their thoughts and their brilliance, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a really good point, Heather.
yeah. I love that. That's so awesome. And then you just continued to reach out to people and grow your business and just offer help. And did you grow your business by referral? Tell us a little bit about how, once you realized what it was that like really lit you up, how did you then find the success in that? Because I think that's a missing piece for a lot of female business owners, is that they know what they love, but have a hard time truly monetizing that. Sometimes they might even feel a little bit of guilt because it comes so easy, right? So tell us a little bit about how you took that and made it successful to what it is today.
It feels like a process of peeling back layers and shedding identities and really paring down and simplifying and focusing. And what I mean is, there was a lot of mindset shifting that I had to do, because I had the identity of a marketer for so long. And what I do now is harnessed as marketing and communication. I mean, gosh, we're all working on communication.
Or should be.
Or should be. But you're right. But I guess and this is something that continually evolves, but I just find there are frequently opportunities for me to be even more focused and clear on what I do and who I'm for, and what I don't do and who I'm not for. And it takes a lot of like discipline and commitment, which I'm always working on honing, to be really, really clear about that. And maybe you can relate to this, Heather, but like you'll have a realization of like another layer of your niche, or a way you can go deeper in. And so that's clear to you in your mind, but like it takes your website or your social media profiles a little while to catch up with where your head is. So that's kind of part of the evolution as well. But in terms of finding the success in this, it's been so important for me to just be really clear of what it is, and really speak about that, and not make it any broader than I want it to be, because there's a lot of temptation. And I see this in myself, and I see it in other women entrepreneurs that I'm in relationships with, to offer a lot of things, or offer one thing in a lot of ways. And a phrase that my coach uses all the time is that the confused mind doesn't buy. I also think the confused mind doesn't communicate very well. And so letting go of what it's not, what I offer is this specific thing, and that's all that it is. That has been really instrumental in finding success in this, being really clear, making sure I'm attracting the right people, making sure that when we have a conversation, we're on the same page. And also, and just in feeling in my own structuring of my time and my own marketing efforts, like making sure that they're very forthright and clear to me, as well as clear to my audience.
Did you notice any resistance in yourself as you kind of went on that like evolved journey? Did you notice, that's hard. That is definitely a hard thing to do, to really grow yourself and make those mindset shifts that you spoke of. Um, were you able to accept that pretty freely, or did you find yourself resisting that in any way?
Definitely, I'm a pro at resistance, Heather. I have practice all the time. I'm so good at it. Yeah, no, I definitely am on the a lot of times spent on the resistance train. I think in part because letting go of identities, it it's uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and it can feel kind of naked and exposed, even if you're not going public with it yet, but just within yourself, like, oh, if I'm not that anymore, then what exactly am I now?
Yes.
And that's why I mentioned that it's this continual evolution, because I feel like I'm always going to like lift up a pebble and find another kind of resistance underneath of it.
Mhm.
And it is so what I find works really well for me in terms of processing that and then embracing the resistance, or at least working through it, is just giving myself a lot of time to not know yet, and
Mhm.
just feel kind of awkward and like feel scared. I read a good book a couple years back written by the co-founder of Pixar, I think, and I'm not remembering his name right now, but I believe the book was called Creativity Inc.
Yes, I read that book.
Oh, it was excellent. And I
Mhm.
believe it was in that book where he talks about us. I think he talks about a study, or no, I'm mixing things a little bit. In any case, I remember hearing about a study, and I think it referenced him, that
Mhm.
showed that some of the most successful leaders are inclined to use the words scared and afraid and fearful, whereas less successful leaders might be more inclined to use words like anxious or uncertain or overwhelmed. And I was
Mm.
really struck by this idea that a very successful leader doesn't beat around the bush with what those feelings mean.
Mm.
And I regularly feel scared. And the
Mhm.
practice that I've gotten into, I do it in my journal or I do it in conversation with my partner, is like, hey, I'm really scared right now. I'm scared for this reason. I'm scared for that reason. I'm scared that this might happen. I'm scared that that might happen. And I find that articulating those fears makes their grip on me less ferocious,
Mm.
and will often even help me find my way to move through them. An action I can
Mhm.
take, or a perspective shift I can make, or a mindset shift I can make. And that practice of naming what I'm feeling and not pretending it's anything other than being scared has
Right.
really helped me stay scared for less time.
Yeah. And helpful that you have a team of trusted people, including your
Yes.
partner and probably some others that you can share those share that with, and that they can also be there as a support to like help you through it, right? That's a pretty key thing, especially in business.
Yeah, and that's why, I think like the kind of communities and spaces that you build, Heather, are so important, because you are in this space where it's safe to use that language and acknowledge those feelings, and nobody's going to try to talk you out of them or problem solve at you. You just get to have those feelings and work through them at your own pace.
Mhm. So, leaning into that a little bit more, as we've probably all felt on some level that we can oftentimes grow outside of a certain friend group or just certain
Mm,
people that were part of our journey for a certain period of time, but we know that it's time to move on, maybe, or have there be maybe just a little bit more boundaries with certain people as we grow into where we know that we're going, and standing confident in that. um, like you said, who we surround ourselves with is so important.
mm.
How was that process for you, and how did you seek out, did you, I guess maybe the question is, did you have to seek out a new community at some point, and how did you do that?
Yes, 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 yes. So I think actually, a recent example of this that was interesting is letting go of clients.
Mm.
So it dawned on me about a year ago that I had a couple of clients who were totally lovely people and really not the right fit for my business anymore. And so and at first my mindset was, well, I'll replace this, or I'll let go of this client when I've replaced the income, the
Mm.
revenue that I'm
Mhm.
generating from working with them. And thankfully I had the realization that I had the order backwards. I needed to let
Yes.
go of the client to make room for a better fit client to bring that revenue into my business. So that was a really important realization that I had. And I, came up with a process, an offboarding process, and let these folks go. And that was really, really good for my business and just how I felt too. Like, one of my indicators when something's not right is resentment. And if you or anybody listening, you might have a different kind of feeling that comes up that's like a signal. But for me, it's like when I start resenting something, that really gets my attention. And in terms of relationships, personal ones, it's been trickier. I love making friends. I love maintaining relationships. And so rather than I'm trying to think of, there haven't been any situations where I've really felt like, oh, I need to break up with this person, or
Sure.
I really need to
Mhm.
change something here. It's more been that I've noticed kind of a drifting apart, or even if we're still from time to time in touch, I don't feel drawn to talk with them about my business.
Mhm.
And my business is such a huge part of my life that, especially at first when I started entrepreneuring, I remember feeling pretty lonely
Mhm.
because friends in more traditional 9 to 5s, we just couldn't have the same conversation.
Mhm.
And I got a lot of solace out of podcasts. But I have noticed as I've made more friends who are entrepreneurs and just find myself being drawn to them and the things we can talk about, I do notice kind of in tandem that other people I'm still friends with, we just the quality of our conversation, we just talk about different things. And I used to feel kind of like I owed everybody like a business update, because if we're friends, well, then I need to talk to you about the things that are going on in
Mm.
my life. And so a really important boundary that I had to make for myself was I don't owe anybody a business update. I can, if they ask how my business is doing, I can just say that it's going great, thank you, and put a period on that, because I really have struggled over time with oversharing, just feeling like I owed people a lot of information about my career.
Hmm.
And so I've had to learn, and therapy helped. I'm a big therapy fan. Had to learn to just have some boundaries with myself and learn to just keep some things private in certain relationships.
Yeah. And being such an open person, I would think that that would be kind of challenging.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think partly it came from, well, what doesn't come from our childhood, first of all.
Right, right.
But secondly,
Yes.
I think I learned through a couple different key relationships when I was growing up that, like, if you're close with someone, then you tell them everything.
Mhm.
And if you don't tell them everything, then it's kind of a betrayal of your relationship.
Mhm.
And so I've had to really to unlearn that and re-educate myself about boundaries in relationships. And
Yeah.
it definitely took some conscious doing.
Yeah, yeah. It's not so interesting like that business really does, at least for me and some of the women that I work with, like it really does like heighten some of those areas like as you called it, we need to unlearn so that we
Yes.
can move past those barriers and just find our place and where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Heather, like, can you imagine a more wild ride through your own psyche than entrepreneurship?
No, I cannot. It has been, yeah, quite the wild ride. One that if I think like you, that if I would have seen the full scope of the like twists and turns, like you know how like when you go to Disneyland and
Yeah.
what's that ride that's completely in the dark? Um, Space Mountain or whatever, right? Like, is that the
Okay.
one
Yes.
where like you don't see anything and on the ride when you're feeling it, you realize why you didn't see the ride before you got on there because you probably wouldn't have signed up for it, right?
Right.
And I feel
I
like
love that
that has been
analogy.
what entrepreneurship has been for me, anyways, because it's like, oh yeah, I could have never imagined some of the twists, turns, and challenges and the times where like that suspension midair where you're like, like, is this seatbelt on like truly tight enough? Am I gonna
Right.
fall out to my death? Like, what is going to
Right.
actually happen here?
Yeah, that's such a good
Yeah.
point, because and this comes up a lot with when it comes to publishing bold thought leadership, is it really can make your nervous system feel like your life is under threat.
Mhm.
Just because of our evolutionary biology, it can really feel that dire. Like, oh shit, am I about to, yeah, like go
Yeah.
flying out of this roller coaster? And so I like that analogy because it really hits home like how it can physically feel so scary.
Like my stomach is in my throat and that shouldn't
Right.
be, and what is going to happen next?
Yes.
So let's dive into like the actual ins and outs of your business now that I've just like gone into the depths of kind of like the background and stuff, which was very fascinating. Thank you so much for taking us a little bit deeper there. Um, let's talk about the processes in the system. So it sounds like it's equal parts processes as it is also equal parts kind of mindset work to get over that exposure feeling, or that kind of like feeling of like nakedness when you are doing the work of thought leadership and really asking people to kind of tap into an area that not a lot of leaders go to, right?
Hmm.
And so you're guiding them there and you're kind of helping them there. What's that process like for your clients?
It depends on the client. I have some clients who are like, "Oh gosh, like no problem, totally comfortable saying all the things." Uh, and in that situation, it's the system and the structure. They've done their mindset work. They're all good on that front, and they need support with the actual mechanics, the writing, the production, uh, all of the everything that goes into producing a really compelling thought leadership article, for example.
Hmm.
But in other cases, yeah, there are some blocks. We all have them when it comes to, I find I work primarily with women, and there's kind of the usual suspects come up. Who's going to not like me if I say this? Who am I going to
Hmm.
make mad? Um, Qualification itis. I'm not qualified enough to say this yet. I don't know enough yet. Those are pretty frequent. And what my clients find makes such a big difference though is that they're not going it alone. They're not like by themselves with a Word document trying to say these really bold and truthful things, just
Hmm.
like with me, myself, and I. It can make such a difference to have a degree of separation between you and your thoughts, and then the production of them and turning them into something marketable. And so, this is why well-known people who have published books, I'm thinking of like Sheryl Sandberg, for example, or Michelle Obama, they have
Hmm.
co-writers.
Hmm.
It's not just because of the time. I would argue it's not just because of the time, although I'm sure that's a consideration, but having someone who's letting you just kind of free speak, or sometimes I say word vomit, what you think and the stories that come to you and the connections. I mean, it can fly through your mind so fast. And when you have someone dedicated to capturing that and then making that more beautiful and coherent and enticing, that takes so much of the pressure off of you.
Hmm.
And sometimes just that separation alone is enough to kind of unleash your tongue, so to
Hmm.
speak.
Yeah.
And then there are still times when my client will say something really like snappy or really sharp, and I'll take it down and I'll say, "Ooh, that's a good one." And then she'll be like, "I don't really want to say that though." And I'll say, "Okay, well, let's let it rest. I'm gonna include it in the article. If you hate it, we'll take it out. But I would encourage you to consider leaving it in because this is the stuff that makes you memorable."
Hmm. Love that. How much, since you mentioned, imposter syndrome, basically in one way or another,
Hmm.
how much of that do you feel like is, because for some people, feeling like they may not know enough, there might be a little bit of truth to that. But I always
Hmm.
love unpacking. What would you say if you could break it down to a percentage of the women that say, "Oh, I'm not qualified enough to speak to that"? How much of that is truth versus how much of that is just us kind of stopping ourselves from leaning
Hmm.
into that?
That's an interesting question. In terms of a percentage, I mean, it really like I think a lot of it comes down to it's about what you do know. And there's
Mhm.
always going to be more that you don't know. And so there's kind of no cheese down that tunnel of like, well, I don't know enough yet, because you know something that will be helpful to someone,
Mhm.
even if it's not what you would like to know in 10 years from now and the people that you'd like to support in that kind of future version of yourself. But I tell myself and my clients all the time, like, you have enough now. I mean, my gosh, like the epidemic or the pandemic of like not enoughness that plagues women entrepreneurs and women leaders is, I mean, it's just decimating in terms of
Mhm.
our creativity, our productivity, just feeling good as we go through our days and do the things that we do. And so I would just challenge anyone who has that tension within themselves of they're like, well, I know some stuff, but I don't know as much as I could know. That's always going to be true. And so I would invite you to really go deep on what you do know and allow yourself to ask, how can I make this relevant to my client?
Mm.
It's not always, or it's seldom about like finding what's relevant to your client. It's your ability to build a bridge to make something relevant to your clients.
Yeah.
What about you, Heather? Like, what would you say? Because you work with so many women, you meet so many
Mhm.
women. What's your sense of like tension or percentage between or ratio of like they they know enough versus like actually they could stand to learn a little more?
Yeah, I would say less than 5% of the people that come through our doors, um, could lean like on if they come in with like a very specific like this is what I want to really move forward with. Less than 5% of them could spend a little bit more time like getting to know that, or
Interesting.
we unpack maybe a little bit like of a different segue, because like it's so layered, because sometimes it's also like, well, I see this other thing like really successful for somebody over here and I know some about it, and so I want to do the thing that's successful, right? I want to take the
Ah,
path
good
that
point.
is, proven, so that I don't fail, so that I don't like look like an idiot for trying something and having it not work out, right? Or I look
Yes.
so I think that there's some of it wrapped up in that less than 5%, right? Because oftentimes we can kind of lean in and like shift a little bit of the original thought into something that's more true to them, which speaks to
Hmm.
your point where, so the majority of women do have what it takes, do
Oh
have
yes.
a voice to share. And I'm glad that we're going there today, because I know that so many of our listeners struggle with that, especially now as they're maybe faced with having to take a different career path because they were they can't go to work right now because, our state just shut down once again. Like,
Wow.
there might be situations right now that women are really facing where that doubt does come in, and that imposter syndrome, and I'm not qualified, or the not enoughness, like you mentioned. And um I think that it's so important for women to understand that, like what you said, and like I'm echoing, where you just got to lean in, go deep on what you do know. I love that. I love what you said.
Yeah, you're enough now. And I think I would venture that one of the reasons we kind of we don't always notice how much we know and how much we're already enough is because we spend a ton of time in problem solving mode and not nearly
Mhm.
as much time in kind of creativity, rumination, revelation mode.
Mhm.
And, you know, and frankly, sometimes if you're Zoom schooling your children, you're not going to really be able to have a ton of time to
Yes.
like meditate on your knowledge. But if you can make that happen, whether it's when you're taking a walk or in the morning or after your kids are asleep, I always find when I give myself the space to just let my thoughts come to me, I have so many good ideas and so much insight to offer that never occurs to me when I'm like doing my to-do list or responding to emails or like
Mhm.
trying to fix stuff and trying to find the answer. If I have this urgent motive, it's
Mhm.
like it scares the good ideas away.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's so good. Creating that space, allowing it to naturally kind of craft its way out.
Yes.
So, let's say I come to you and I'm like, okay, Eva, I'm loving everything that you're saying. How do we work together? Like, what is it that like you exactly do? Like, talk to us a little bit about the process of working with you.
Okay. Well, at first I'm like, woman, yes, let's get on the phone. And so we start with a discovery call where I seek to understand where they want to be, what they feel like is ready to be unleashed within them, what they want to bring to the marketplace in terms of their unique perspective, their bold opinion. So we do a lot of uncovering together on that initial call. And from there, in terms of working together, it's usually either kind of a advisory relationship where we'll have regular check-in calls where we develop their ideas together and we come up with how they're going to execute on their ideas, and then they go and execute, whether that means it's a video series on Instagram Live or it's an article series that they're publishing on their website. It can be the medium of your thought leadership is less important than just picking something and doing it. So that's one avenue that we'll pursue together. On the other side, as I mentioned, I love writing. And so for the clients who really want to be publishing articles and be thought leaders in the written word, I will often work with them and actually do their ghostwriting and collaborate very closely with them on those articles and then help them, quote unquote, give them legs. That's the phrase I like to use. You got to give them legs. If it's just withering on the vine of your website, it's not serving anyone. You got to give it legs. And so we'll use tools like social media, like networking strategies, email list growth to make sure that this wisdom that they're offering to the world is really being seen and making an impact on as many right fit people as possible.
I love that. I love that so much. And you have a free course, right? Talk to us about that.
Yes, I do. So it is called the 5 Pillars of Magnetic Thought Leadership. And you can find it at number 5, magneticpillars.com. And it's a short course that will walk you through the 5 pillars of magnetic thought leadership. So, studies have shown that the most dynamic, persuasive, compelling thought leadership has these 5, well, they call them pillars, but like attributes to them. And so in the email course, I walk you through what those are and I give you examples and I give you some exercises for how you can start honing these pillars and including them in your thought leadership content.
So valuable, so good. Thank you for providing that and letting our audience know. How amazing. I would love to wrap up with a couple of questions that I ask each of our guests. And the first one, excellent. The first one would be, on your journey, we've talked about so much of your journey so far today. And we understand here that we can only grow in the success of our lives and our businesses to the amount that we are growing as individuals, right? So to bridge that gap, oftentimes we find a lot of podcasts, books, resources, trainings that have really helped us bridge that gap. What would you say were some of the most instrumental on your growth journey?
Yeah, well, I would say that 3 are coming to mind. So the first one is Glambition Radio with Ali Brown. So that is a podcast. I think I started listening in 2016 or 17. And, I don't think anybody else out there is really facilitating the kinds of conversations that Ali is with preeminent women leaders. Agreed. Who are she interviews women from all walks of life, but there is a heavy emphasis on really high revenue generating women entrepreneurs, and hearing their stories and just their perspectives is so inspiring. So I love that show. I had the honor of working on that show with Ali in 2019. That was really, really fun. And I learned a ton. So Glambition Radio is a great resource for inspiration and just for like cool people to follow and be inspired by. I would follow that up with, I love the email subscription. So I know everyone's got a very full inbox, but I really do recommend the Broadsheet, which is published by fortune.com. And it comes out Monday through Friday in the morning. And it's I guess you could call it, parts of it are kind of roundups in terms of curating information, but there's also always like an introductory short little essay about whatever is going on in like the news of women in the world. So they cover women in politics, women in business, women in startups, women in popular culture, celebrities. I mean, for women entrepreneurs, I think it's a fantastic resource just to keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world of like women in power.
Mm-hmm.
I highly recommend the broadsheet. Just search Fortune broadsheet. It's free to sign up for. And the final resource I love is I really recommend my coach Eleanor Beaton. She is based out of Canada, and she has a podcast called Power Presence Position. She also has a very very hilarious email list. Like just her writing is very very engaging and very funny. And so I also recommend that women follow her and check out her content.
I love Eleanor. Yeah, awesome. This is great. You are speaking my language. I love it.
Yes.
Tell us now to wrap up, what would be your top couple of tips of advice for women that are also on their journey and their path? We have women that are trying to build businesses that are either new in business or they, have a side hustle wanting to really lean into it. What would be your top couple of tips of advice?
Yes, I like this question. So my first one would be I strongly recommend that you invest in yourself. And I say that strongly because I avoided doing this for a long time and it really, really stunted my growth, my business growth, and certainly my personal growth. And I find when I think back, I realized I had really drunk the Kool-Aid of like DIYing everything, and like
Mm.
rugged individualism means that I was like somehow any success that I earned was like more real. And that is a lie. I
Mhm.
mean, we don't do anything alone, from the groceries that we buy to the houses that we live in. And I really, when I was thinking that I would just download every free PDF and figure out everything on my own, it just meant that everything took twice as long and was twice as hard. And I felt like garbage because I wasn't forming relationships and seeking support where I needed it. So invest in yourself. I mean, it doesn't end when
Mhm.
your formal education does, right? Like whether that's certainly I recommend coaching. Maybe it looks like therapy for you. Maybe it looks like buying courses, books, even like investing in like a weekend retreat to work on your business.
Mhm.
All of that makes such a difference. And if I could go back and shake my finger at my younger self, I would say, Eva, invest in yourself sooner.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, this is something that I continue to find challenging, but it's to trust yourself.
Mm.
And, whether that's like trust yourself when it comes to the social media networks you're drawn to, or the people that you're drawn to, or the ideas that are kind of whispering to you, and you're like, that's kind of maybe sounds stupid, but maybe it sounds cool. Just, we're not really taught. I think this is true of all humans in Western culture, at least, but certainly of women, that we're not really taught to trust our bodies, our ideas, our voices, our intuition. And that is where your greatness is. That's where your uniqueness is. And I would just implore all of us, and I include myself, to just keep working on that relationship with our inner selves and really trusting how things feel in our bodies, trusting our reactions to things, like really just forging as intimate and trusting a relationship as you can with yourself.
Mm. So good. Eva, thank you so much. That was such an amazing conversation. Where can people connect with you from here?
Yes, I would love, love, love if listeners would find me on LinkedIn. I am Eva Jannotta, two N's, two T's. Put as many consonants in there as you can, and you'll find me. I LinkedIn is my social media network of choice. And if you send me a connection request, let me know in the note that you found me on She Leads Me. I would just love to talk with you there.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for being here. Everybody, check out the free email course that she has. We'll link it in the show notes. And we'll thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Heather. This was great.